Good morning, grade 12s, good day, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time you're watching this video. You may not see me, but it's not important to see me. It's just what I'll be saying to you and what you'll be reading through the slides because I'm experiencing a bit of load shedding here at rest. Today I'm going to be discussing the Vietnam War, of which is an essay that many of you have been asking for in the comments of the previous videos that I've uploaded. So I'll start by saying that please do not change anything that you have studied before, and please do not interfere with the essays that your teachers have taught you. But please, if you do find something that is interesting and maybe useful in this essay or in this PowerPoint presentation, please just take it and then add it onto your existing knowledge because I don't want you to be cramming essays because it is not important to do so. What is important is to write an essay according to your understanding and just by applying your own knowledge and how you have understood the essay throughout the year because you've been doing it from January if it is, or maybe from February, I don't know. So let us go straight into the first slide, of which are the reasons for the involvement of USA in the Vietnam War. Remember that in Vietnam there was already a war existing, of which was a war for independence against France, of which France was occupying Vietnam at that time. So the Vietnamese were victorious in the war, and then they attained independence. But then in the Geneva Conference, Vietnam was divided into two parts, of which was South Vietnam and North Vietnam in 1954. So in this division, North Vietnam was controlled by communist Ho Chi Minh, of which North Vietnam was communist, governed by communists. Okay, so South Vietnam was then an independent state at that time, a democratic state at that time, and no one was controlling it. Um, uh, Despite for Ngondim Dip, of which was just a ruler, but he was favoring capitalism. So Ngondim became unpopular when he refused to have elections, which were stipulated to be held in 1956 because he feared communist victory. So he became unpopular and then he was overthrown by the Viet Cong, of which was a military coup or troops which were communists, but then they were occupying the South at that time. So the USA was also alarmed that Ngoni Mdim was overthrown and the Viet Cong had already taken 40% of the land in the South. So they had to uh, quickly and go and contain the spread of communism so that they can spread their own capitalism in South Vietnam because they were fearing what was known as the domino theory, which stated that if one country falls prey to communism, the other countries will follow like dominoes. So in 1955, the USA started providing financial aid and military advisors and resources to the South Vietnamese army. Whereas the communist North Vietnamese sent supplies to the Viet Cong through the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was underground, which connected South Vietnam and North Vietnam. And you remember that North Vietnam was backed by USSR, of which was Russia, and China, of which were two communist superpowers. So let us look at the next slide. You need to be aware of this essay because this essay is a simple essay of which you are asking yourself W and H questions of let us look at how we are applying that in this paragraph. So this essay is mostly about the strategies that were used by USA, but then they were unsuccessful. Uh, so we are going to look at the first strategy, which was the strategic hamlet or the safe village systems. It doesn't matter on what you refer to the strategy as long as you can define what it was. So USA introduced the safe villages policy or the strategic hamlets in 1962, of which aimed to isolate the peasants from the Viet Cong and their influence. So these rural uh, hamlets were places which were supposed to be safe places for peasants to stay in order for them to be isolated from the Viet Cong and their communist influence. So rural peasants, this is how it worked. Rural peasants were placed in specially protected villages with adequate resources and infrastructure, schools, water, and all that. So this strategy was unsuccessful. And why? The Vietnamese people were not very happy with being removed from their homes as they practiced ancestral worship. So they did not want to leave their places of birth. Okay, so the peasants and the Viet Cong had a very good relationship. So peasants helped the Viet Cong with shelter. The Viet Cong ended up occupying these villages. So the Viet Cong uh, were promising the peasants that there will be glory after if South Vietnam could be communist. So the peasants who were desperate listened to that, and then they helped the Viet Cong with shelter and all that, and resources and places to hide. So in the end, they ended up occupying those those shelters. So this policy was aborted in 1964. So this strategy of writing this paragraph, of asking yourself the WH questions, can work in this manner. So you're asking yourself, what was the strategy? So the strategy was a strategic hamlet or the safe villages system. When was this introduced? It was introduced in 1962. So in this essay, I don't want to say this, but I'll say it. It doesn't matter about how you place the date. It's just about your the way you put your words or what you're saying, like how you maneuver this essay and how you write your lines of argument using the pill strategy or the pill whatever. So what was the aim of this policy? You're asking yourself. So you remember that, oh, the aim of this policy was to isolate the peasants from the Viet Cong and their influence. And then you should explain how the strategy worked. So the rural peasants were placed in this specially protected villages with adequate resources or enough resources and infrastructure. And was this strategy successful or not? Of course, it wasn't successful because the Vietnamese people were not happy with being removed from their homes as they practiced ancestral worship. And then the peasants and the Viet Cong had a very good relationship. So the peasants helped the Viet Cong with shelter, and the Viet Cong ended up occupying these villages. So as a result, this policy was abandoned or aborted in 1964. I'm pretty sure maybe you are following me right there as you are watching or listening. So let us go on to the following or the next strategy, of which was called Operation Rolling Thunder. So after the death of President Kennedy, or President Kennedy at the time, he was the president who introduced the strategic hamlet. So after the death of Kennedy, he was succeeded by President Lyndon B. Johnson. So the Lyndon B. Johnson wanted to increase U.S. involvement in the war, but then there wasn't enough reasons for him to increase war tensions or the involvement in the war in Vietnam. So there was this incident that happened in 1964 where North Vietnamese torpedo boats torpedoed a U.S. warship, and then that gave President Lyndon B. Johnson a the right to raise war tensions, and it was referred to as the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution because this happened at the Gulf of Tonkin. This whole incident of the North Vietnamese torpedo boats which torpedoed a U.S. warship. So in 1964, the U.S. Congress gave Lyndon B. Johnson, of which he was the president of U.S. at that time, uh, all rights, all power into whatever he wanted to do to strengthen the war in Vietnam. So he introduced a strategy called Operation Rolling Thunder in 1965, of which the aim was to bomb North Vietnam through destroying port bases and also the Ho Chi Minh Trail, of which was the supply line between South and North Vietnam. This strategy also wasn't successful because North Vietnam was mainly agricultural, so the bombs couldn't target the industries. It was just those agricultural places like farms and whatever. So the bombs killed innocent civilians instead, of which was a bad picture to paint as a popular country, USA. So the Ho Chi Minh Trail was underground, and as a result, it was not destroyed. So it was a disaster because what it had aimed, it could not fulfill. So let us look at the following slide. I want us to be quick because I want to show you how simple writing this essay is. It is just writing this essay using your own words, but using the context of what exactly happened. So let us look at the search and destroy policy. I'm not sure if my strategies are coming into a chronological order, but that doesn't matter as long as you know your story. As long as you know your story, you will get an A in history. So let us look at the search and destroy policy. So the USA had failed with Operation Rolling Thunder. This is some sort of an opening statement, like a I won't say a point, but yes, it is some sort of an opening statement to remind you of what you are going to write about. So, as the USA had failed with Operation Rolling Thunder, it introduced a search and destroy policy. I don't know the year. I tried to do all research, but it it doesn't seem to pop up. So the search and destroy policy was introduced, of which aimed of which was to find the enemy and destroy them. You remember that it failed during the Operation Rolling Thunder because innocent civilians were being killed. So now they had to introduce a solid strategy whereby you have to find the enemy and just kill them or shoot them or terminate them. So this policy was also a failure because the Viet Cong and the Vietnamese looked alike. So Vietnam is a country, I think, I'm not sure if it is in Asia or in Europe, but the people in there are similar to Chinese people and Japanese people because those people, you can't separate those people. They look the same, they look alike until maybe you listen to what they say or whatever. So in Vietnam, they had one language and they were people of the same nation. They were the same. It's just that they believed in different things. It's just that they had different roles in the country at that time. Some others were troops, like the Viet Cong, and others were peasants. So you couldn't tell if this person is a peasant or this person is a Viet Cong soldier. So the Viet Cong the Viet Cong also used guerrilla tactics such as shooting and hiding in the bushes. The Viet Cong used the tunnel to crawl underground. Then the US soldiers could not follow them as they were bigger in body sizes. There were also booby traps underground, which trapped the US troops. The strategy, therefore, was a complete disaster. It is a simple essay, guys. Let us move on to the next slide. And then there was this Operation Wrench Hand, or the technological weapons which were used by USA. So the USA came up with another strategy called Operation Wrench Hand slash technological weapons. So choppers, firstly, for an example, when we say technological weapons, a chopper or an helicopter can be included into such examples. So helicopters or choppers were used to transport troops in and out of North Vietnam. So they used a chemical named Agent Orange to spray over the vegetation to destroy leaves hiding the supply routes. It caused long-lasting environmental damage. So this herbicide called Agent Orange, it was sprayed over the vegetation, the trees, the plants, and it's destroyed the leaves. Which so the main aim was to expose the supply roads, of which was the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but then it was underground. Still, it was underground, so they were unable to see it. So let us look at the Agent Blue, of which was a chemical or herbicide used to destroy crops, so as to deprive the guerrillas of food. So they wanted the guerrillas or the people of North Vietnam to starve, right? But then Vietnam was a largely an agricultural area, so there were many crops, there were many plantations that were made. So in this way, North Vietnam was not affected in any way whatsoever. So, and also there was this chemical called napalm, which was a substance used to burn the skin and bones of the Viet Cong. Again, this substance was also disastrous because now USA was criticized as napalm caused severe cancer and made women infertile. This chemical killed and damaged innocent civilians. There were pictures um, of of children running away from napalm attacks, right? In pictures of those or archives of the Vietnam War. But then, okay, let us move on to the next slide, of which is the Tet Offensive. So now, ziyajika izinto, things are changing now. So the Tet Offensive, it was, I won't say it was a strategy, but it was, I'll call it a surprise guerrilla attack, right? So following the chemical war, of which was the Operation Ranch Hand, strategy, the Viet Cong responded by landing a surprise guerrilla attack in January 1968. So it was launched during a religious festival called Tet. At this festival, it is some sort of a New Year's Eve in Vietnam. I don't know what to call it, but I think it is some sort of a New Year's Eve. They're celebrating a new year. They're starting a new year. So they celebrate it and they call it a Tet festival. So before the festival, both parties signed a ceasefire agreement to maintain peace on this religious day or this religious festival. But then, despite the ceasefire, North Vietnamese troops and the Viet Cong attacked about 100 cities, including the capital city, Saigon, in South Vietnam. The Viet Cong even captured the American embassy for 6.5 hours, of which the American embassy, these are the military bases where soldiers they stay there and they keep their weapons and whatever. So the Viet Cong even captured the American embassy for 6.5 hours. They were well planned and coordinated because now they were using the tunnels to crawl from North Vietnam to South Vietnam from their hiding places into the cities without anyone seeing them. And they were carrying the weapons in coffins to disguise the weapons so that the American troops may think that they were just carrying what they were carrying. Maybe they were going to funerals or maybe, yeah, whatever. So the US soldiers became demoralized after this, in as much as the US soldiers killed more Viet Cong soldiers, but then they became demoralized because they started to see that no, they were going to lose the war because they have tried many strategies, but then just by this offensive that was done by the Viet Cong or North Vietnam, they became demoralized because they saw the damage that was done by the Viet Cong or North Vietnam. They saw what North Vietnam was capable of in just one offensive. So let's go to the My Lai massacre. So the My Lai massacre, they it was, you know what a massacre is, the mass murder of people, not like a genocide, but then yeah, when many people are killed in one day in a place or a community, we call it a massacre. So the US troops were frustrated by the Tet offensive, and then their leaders or commanders, they persuaded them to increase body counts. When we speak about body counts, we are talking about the number of people at the time in a war. We are talking about the number of people that you should kill in the opposition. So now the leaders wanted American troops to kill more Viet Cong, right? So in March 1968, an American platoon attacked a village called My Lai 4. They spotted this village in their maps, of which was called My Lai 4, where they had rumors that the village had Viet Cong soldiers in it. And guess what? The pla the platoon went straight into My Lai and then also find out that this village was occupied by women and children, where they killed women and children, and they even raped the women before they killed them. The result was that 400 people died at the My Lai massacre, and only three of those 400 were identified as the Viet Cong. This incident of the My Lai massacre was televised, and anti-war campaigns intensified their strike action because there were people who were against the war. They were against the involvement of USA in the Vietnam War because they thought Vietnam should just fight their war, and whoever wins wins. There shouldn't be involvement from any other country. So this put more pressure on President Johnson to withdraw from the war. Yes, the anti-war campaigns put more pressure on President Johnson to withdraw from the war. Let us look at the Vietnamization. So now President Johnson's reign was over. I think it was in 1968, I'm not sure. But yes, in this year, the newly elected President Richard Nixon promised to end the war with peace. And then he was going to achieve this by introducing what he called Vietnamization. The aim of this was to spend more money on arming and training South Vietnamese soldiers so as to gradually withdraw US soldiers from Vietnam. So in this way, they were teaching to South Vietnamese soldiers to fight for themselves, right? So what so by doing this, US soldiers will be withdrawn from the war. Instead, he started heavily bombing of North Vietnam. Instead of withdrawing the US troops, he started heavily bombing of North Vietnam. And in 1970, he even ordered the bombing of Laos and Cambodia to destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail, of which again was unsuccessful because the Ho Chi Minh Trail was underground. North Vietnam responded by invading Laos and Cambodia, which ended as communist states or communist cities. The war became very unpopular to the US Congress and it refused to vote for spending more money in the war, right? So in 1973, a ceasefire was agreed upon by the USA. Very important. This completes this whole paragraph. It contains a lot of things, but the most important ideas in this paragraph is this Vietnamization, explaining what Vietnamization was and how it was customized by Richard Nixon, and explaining the ceasefire. You may forget everything else, but then don't forget about the ceasefire and Vietnamization. So let us look at the following points, other points. Despite the ceasefire agreement, the war continued in Vietnam and the US government continued to send supplies to South Vietnam for 2 more additional years. The South Vietnamese army was still unable to defeat the Viet Cong. So you see that now Richard Nixon bit was being a bit unfair because now he signed a ceasefire agreement, but then he continued to supply South Vietnam with weapons for 2 more years into the war. So the South Vietnamese army was still unable to defeat the Viet Cong, and in 1975, the Viet Cong captured Saigon and were victorious in the war. You remember that Saigon is the capital city, so they captured Saigon and were victorious in the war. In 1976, Vietnam was united under one communist rule. So this is, I'm not sure, but yeah, it is important. It is important to know like the factors that led to Viet to the Viet Cong winning the war. You remember that the USA was undermining Vietnam since it was a small nation of peasants. So remember that USA is a superpower in the world. Even now, USA is the most believed to be the most superpower or the most powerful or feared nation in the world. So as a result, the USA sends young, inexperienced soldiers who couldn't keep up with the strategies of the Viet Cong. So now to show that it was a undermining Vietnam, the USA sent young, inexperienced soldiers who couldn't keep up with the strategies of the Viet Cong. You remember that the Viet Cong soldiers were already from a war against France, and they won that war against France. But then USA wasn't aware of that. USA came here and then they undermined the Viet Cong soldiers, and then they brought young, inexperienced soldiers, maybe through transcription. We are all not sure about that, but I think it is called transcription, where you send young uh, people to be soldiers or young boys or young men to be soldiers. So the Viet Cong were familiar with the environment, whereas the U.S. troops were not familiar with the environment. The U.S. soldiers are not familiar with the weather of Vietnam. I'm not sure what that is implying. So yeah, I think it is the end of this essay, but I think there is a point where you are adding the effects of the war, and I just couldn't add all that because I was doing this video late, and I think that is the most easiest paragraph, followed by the conclusion, of course, of which will depend on the question that you have been asked. But all in all, please, if you are studying history essays, please do not cram these days. I always tell people who panic when they're going to write history essays to not cram essays. They should not write essays on a piece of paper and then read them over and over again just to know those essays. Knowing the essay by using your own understanding is on itself very important. It's just pivotal, and it is a very gigantic step into being a great historian. So please know these essays uh, just by knowing them. Don't study them just because you want to write whatever you have studied throughout the whole year. You should write it using the knowledge that you have obtained, right, from the whole history session. So yeah, I think we have come to an end of this presentation, and I wish you guys the very best of luck with your exams, and I wish that you don't panic. It is simple. It's just a simple thing, and just for encouragement, uh, this is how I was studying my essays. For an example, this essay, there was less research that was done into this essay by me because I did matric in 2021. So I'm likely to forget maybe more of the information on this essay, but just to remind me of the years, I just searched the years. But most of the things, I wrote them from my own knowledge and understanding of 2021, of the year 2021. And yeah, so I wish that you write your essays well and maybe obtain uh, A's, not maybe. It is possible in history to obtain A's. Yeah, if you know your story, if you study well, you will obtain an A, just like as I did. I obtained an A, not just an a 96% in history. And yeah, good luck with the rest of your exams. Feel free to ask me anything. I'll drop my number on the comments below. And anything that is related to mathematical literacy, I can also assist with that. I have a 94% in mathematical literacy. So yeah, thank you.